Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to study a poem for the students of BA Part 3 of the RRBM University, Alwar. And here we have an Indian writer, Indian poet, O.N.V. Kurup of Kerala, who has written this poem in Malayalam. The name of the poem is Earthen Pots, and it has been translated in English for us. And before discussing about the poet or about the style of this poem or about the moral or the analysis, I would first like to give you a paraphrase of the poem. Paraphrase means that let us read the poem line by line and try to find out the meaning of this poem line by line. So the poem is Earthen Pots. The poet is O.N.V. Kurup. How long have we remained here thus, two empty earthen pots, gazing at each other close by in potter's yard. A pot is addressing another pot, and he, along with hundreds of pots, is placed in a potter's yard, and he is telling us the present scenario, the present condition. And he says, for such a long time we have been placed here in this yard and we are doing nothing, simply gazing at each other. Gazing is looking. So I'll read the stanza again, and he says, how long have we remained here thus? Thus is in this position or in this manner. This way we have remained here for such a long time. And who are we? Two empty earthen pots. What are we doing? Gazing at each other. Where are we? Close by in potter's yard. So here in potter's yard, we two pots along with hundreds of other pots are simply waiting for something. Let us see what that thing is. That will come later. But right now we move to the next stanza. And he says, we are placed so close that softly brushing against each other and not quite sure whether touching or not, gazing at each other in inexhaustible zest, we two earthen pots. So once again the poem moves forward, and he is going in more details. And what does he say? That we are placed so close to each other that we can almost feel each other, but we are not touching each other. So softly brushing against each other, but we are not touching, I'm sure. Though he is a little doubtful that yes, it is touching or not touching, but we are constantly looking at each other, we are constantly gazing at each other, and we are full of unfinished energy, unfinished enjoyment, unfinished zest in us. Inexhaustible is something which can never exhaust, something which cannot be finished. So we two earthen pots are full of energy for our lives. Then in the next stanza, the poet compares two things. He compares these earthen pots with those vessels which are used for drinking by the rich people, because rich people drink from the golden goblets. They use vessels which are made of gold or silver or some precious metal. So he is comparing the material used for these earthen pots which are there in the potter's yard and those goblets or those vessels made of precious metal used by the rich. He says, those who from golden goblets drink red wine may dismiss us in contempt and extreme scorn. We may be disliked, we may be disrespected, we may be scorned, we may be laughed at by those people who drink red wine in golden drinking vessels. Why? Because we are we are scorned, or we are disliked, or we are dismissed or disrespected. Why? Because we are made for the simple, poor folk. Folk is people. So we are made for those people who are simple and who are poor, because we are cheap and may easily break. We are so delicate, we are so fragile, we are so tender that we might break. So that is why we are scorned at, we are disdained, and we are also scorned or disrespected, because we are made for the use by people who are simple, people who are poor. And the pot says, yes, true, but it's not always the material of which we are made that is important. Sometimes the utility is more important. The worthiness comes from the utility of that object. So it says, true, yet we are good enough to store the blessed gift of earth, water. And then the poet comes to a very impressive fact, that these earthen pots may be used by simple people, they may be made of cheap material, but they store the most invaluable thing of this earth, and that is water. They store that liquid which is the elixir of life, which sustains life on this planet. So these earthen pots should not think as if they are inferior to those metals like gold and silver. But the pot agrees and says, yes, yet, true, yet we are good enough to store the blessed gift of earth, water, clear and pure. The water which we store, we make sure that it is clear, it is pure, within our hold unpolluted. And as long as the water is in our hold, nothing can pollute it. In fact, we make it more clear, we make it more pure, though we are mere earthen pots, and though the reality is that we are earthen pots made of mud and sand and clay. And then the poet brings a philosophy into the poem. He makes the poem a little philosophical, and he talks about the fate and destiny of these pots. What does he say? Even our makers do not know where tomorrow we shall be, because the future is not in our hands. So the creator, that is the potter, the creator who is God of human beings, he says, even our creator, our makers do not know where tomorrow we shall be, that it, what lies in store for us, what future has for us, we are not sure. And we are not one or two, we are hundreds, hundreds like us who are crowded here. And what are we doing? Are waiting for some unknown buyer. And then he says, we are waiting for some person to come and buy us, and that is what we are. That is why we are made. Somebody will come buy us, take us with him, put water in it, store water for drinking. And so what are we doing? We are waiting and waiting for some unknown buyer. But before buying us, the buyer is going to put us to a test. He is going to buy that pot which he thinks is best quality-wise, which he thinks is a perfect pot, which does not have any crack in it, which is going to be perfect, in perfect shape. So, to lift us up, the buyer is going to pick up one of the pots, or he may pick up one by one many pots and hold us to the ear. He will hold the pot close to his ear, to the buyer's ear, and what will he do? And with a finger stroke, quality test us by the sound which will come when he taps it with his finger. That sound is going to tell him whether the pot is perfect or not, whether the pot has the quality of a good pot or not. And if satisfied, he buys one and walks away. If the buyer is satisfied with the quality with the perfection of the pot, then he walks away, he buys one of the pot. What happens after that? The pot goes away with the buyer, but it is followed by our sighs that bind us in one thought of woe. But because that pot was one amongst us, it was one of our comrades, so we all feel sad on the going away of that pot, and we are sighing. The sigh may be for both the reasons that we are left behind. The sigh may also be that one of the pot, one of the friend has been taken away, and it is a thought of sadness. The sadness on the farewell of a pot, on the going away of a pot which was placed with them for so many days. And he says, yes, the going away of the pot is what? It is an intense sense of an intense sense of loss of one who was among us, one of the comrades, one of the friends who was with us for so many days in this yard along with us, suddenly departs from here. So the sadness is on the departure of that pot, of that comrade. Ah, when does our turn come to depart? And then the pot is addressing the pot close to it, just next to it. Just as the poem now comes a full circle, it began with an address of the two pots. It ends on the address of the same pot, where one pot is addressing the other, and it says, "Ah, when does our turn come to depart? And when it comes, who would be the first to leave?" And even if some buyer comes, I'm sure the buyer will not take both of us together. The buyer is going to buy only one of us together, so only one will be taken away. But who will that one be? Who will be taken away by the buyer? So it ends on that question, the question of uncertainty, the question that who will be the first to go from here, and again the sense of loss, a sense on the sense of sadness when somebody departs. So this is the paraphrase of this poem, and I would just like to say a few things, the questions which are there at the end of the poem. So first thing we have to see is that O.N.V. Kurup has taken up the objects which are so common, the earthen pots, and he has added such a great value to those pots. And he says these objects hold that liquid which is the blessed gift of God, the blessed gift of God. And so we should not go by the material, we should not go by the outward show, we should not go by how a thing looks, we should go by the utility, by the capabilities, or by the worthiness of that thing for which it is used. So he says the poem is divided into two sections or two stanzas, and though both are about pots, the first section centers on two pots, while the second section it moves outward to hundreds of pots. Now the poet makes this move, just he begins with on a personal note, and then he widens the horizon and he generalizes. And he says, look at the way in which the two pots are configured in the first section, their location with each other, that is, they are so close to each other, their attitude, the attitude of friendliness which is there among the pots, they are so attached to each other, and their selves, apart from being comrades and friends, yet they are individual in their own way. They have their own separate identities. So that is there in the first stanza. In the second section, the focus broadens. Now he ropes in hundreds of pots. He is not talking of two pots. He is talking of hundreds of pots, and the generalization is about the generalization is a very important thing which he has made, that it is not the destiny of just one or two pots, but it is the same fate which is there for all of these pots. Then uh, the second the second stanza, it concentrates on emphasizing the inherent worth of the pots. And what is the inherent worth? The inherent worth of the pot is they are capable of storing that liquid which sustains life on earth. They are capable of keeping that liquid clear and pure and unpolluted, and that is the worthiness of the pots. That's what ONV Group wants us to understand and to underline. Though they are cheap and may easily break. Look at these two words. He has used them with so much dexterity. They are cheap and they are breakable. That they are fragile, they are tender, they are breakable. Yet they have that quality in them. How is the worth constructed in terms of their function? That is, though they are made of earth, but their function is unsurpassable. The function is that we all want to go and buy earthen pots for the worth. Worth is how they keep the water clean, clear, pure, unpolluted. Their unknown destiny, yes, the poet dwells on that for some time, and he says the pots are not aware of their destiny. They don't know who the buyer is and when the buyer will come, and yet there is collective unity among these pots. Now the collective unity refers to the kind of friendship or the comradeship which is there among these pots. Then in the next question we have, analyze the ways in which the poet, even as he seems to acknowledge the fragility and the inexpensive nature of the pot, transforms these into virtues. Yes, because then they are available for all the human beings. They are available for the simple poor folks, and the simple poor folks will get to drink the best of water by storing in these pots. How do these seemingly drawbacks, they function in turn in terms of the lives of the common people? Because for the common people, they don't drink red wine from golden goblets, they drink simple water from these earthen pots, but it is the water of this earthen pot which makes them survive on this earth. The red wine is not going to make them survive. So this is how, in these terms, he has constructed this meaning here. And when Kurup writes about the blessed gift of earth, water clear and pure, he is drawing the reader's attention to not only the nature of pot, but also contrasting it to other containers and other liquids. So the other containers are the containers of gold and silver which are used by the rich, and the other liquids are the red wine and other kind of drinks which are used by other people. So the question is, what does this contrast do in terms of groups of people and their ways of life? So this is just as there are two types of drinks he talks about. He talks of two types of material which is used by these people. So he is also talking of the haves and the have-nots, talking of the rich and of the poor. He's talking of that divide which is there in the society, which is there. But he says, but there are certain things which are used by the have-nots, and yet it is the best thing which they are getting in their lives. So in this poem, he has employed symbol of earthen pots to talk about individuals who are seen as merely a mass, as lacking any significant value in themselves. He takes up the imagery of earthen pots, talks about ties that bind these pots together, attachment to each other, their sense of loss when one of them is taken away from them. He also examines the notion of their worthiness and speculates on the possibilities of unknown destinies, which might include something momentous. Though the metaphor he uses is systematically and consistently of mud pots, he imparts greater significance to this slight topic by equating all mud pots to human lives, and thus enlarging and broadening the scope. Because they are made of earth, And even human beings, we say we are made of earth. That is, we are all mortals. We are not immortals. And all the mortals, that is, once we are again going to mix, when we die, we are again going to mix up in the five elements. And earth is one of that element. Though never stated outright, underlying the entire poem is the concept of man as essentially a thing of earth. That is, we are all mortals and we all are going to meet the same fate. So, I think what the poet is trying to say here is that through these earthen pots, he is telling us the how our lives are ephemeral and how fragile even our lives are. Thank you.